thanks to Barbara for this introduction, and thanks for invite today. I'm going to read the report, the first part of this report. I tried because this morning I'm not very well, and also my English is, but the second is a problem. Warrior, on the morning of 6 May 1898, this was the state of mind of Andrea Jatta, heir of the family that linked its name to collecting not only of antiquities since the beginning of the 19th century. Jatta, in fact, wrote his friend Battista de Rossi with an incisive and lapidary tone as a vascular epigram, urging him to prevent the placing in the private market of, I quote, bellissimo vaso istoriato coming from Celle del Campo in the hinterland of Bari. We choose to open this report with a tangible element identified in the wide dynamic of artistic and antiquarian flow directed from southern Italy to Naples and Europe, and from there, as we will see, with further openings on the Anglo-American art market. The aim is to set some coordinate, set some coordinates of our research that we have is a synthesis point in the exhibition Il Museo che non c'è, Arte, Collezionismo, Gusto Antiquario nel Palazzo degli Studi Vitali between 1875 and 1928. Note that this exhibition scheduled for February 28, 2020 will take place in the historical halls of the University of Bari Pantomoro, which hosted the Museo Comunication. Here was designated, I quote, the bellissimo vaso istoriato of which Jatta and Nito de Rossi spoke. From this point of view, the letter of 6 May 1898 is important for two reasons. The first one testified the purchase of an exceptional Apulian red figure crater offered for sale by the lawyer Michele Armese, an exponent of the cultured bourgeoisie of southern Italy, and brother of Raffaele, the author of the decoration of the Petruzzelli Theatre. And above all, the second one gives the direct involvement in Italy of one of the most famous American collectors active between the 19th and the 20th centuries. We are talking about Edward Warren, an exponent of the Bostonian West circles, an intermediary of Isabella Stewart Gardner and several American museums, a patron of a young Bernard Orliensky, who by the time of the Apulian transaction in 1898 had already become famous with the name of Berenson. Among the most well-known purchases or donations made by Warren, remember, for example, the problematic Boston Chrome he intercepted on the Roman art market in 1894, and considered by some under fake, from others the pandan constituted by the Dovizzi throne. Think then of the paintings provided at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, such as the Madonna with the children attributed to the Tuscan mannerist Francesco Morandini, or the Comunication contest tables proposing the Lamentation of Christ, respectively by Carlo Crivelli and Marco Basaliti. Or again, the German Dormitio Virginis, coming from one of the most famous sub-collections, the Neapolitan one of the Princess of Sant'Angelo. It does not seem neutral to consider that these paintings had been reported to Warren by Berenson in the first years of his stay in Italy, immediately after his studies at Harvard University, thanks to the financial support of his American friend. In a short time, the relationship matured, and Berenson was more and more frequently called into question by Warren, for advice and recommendation. For example, in 1894, Warren wrote to, I quote, dear Valvriensi, still using the Lithuanian surname of BB, to ask him to report, I quote, any Greek sculpture or bronze in good condition. Still, it is September 92, when Warren, complaining about the crisis of the art market in Boston, would have again urgent Berenson, hoping for a real professional partnership with him. Warren wrote, I quote, I would be fancy easy to convene Renaissance fames with antiques by adding your name to mine. There is a list of little things that we should know from me and I from you. I may also have something of immediate importance to communicate to you. Last winter in Boston was for me a great fiasco. In this sense, and before Warren's letter of 92, it is possible to assume that something had already moved, starting with Berenson's discovery in 1897 of a land or supply market that could respond to the needs and interest of both Apulian region. Berenson, in fact, already in 1897 had written in his magazine, The Golden Urn, about a traveler before which, I quote, making his way through Italian mountains, an inner city called Altamura, that the city is, had opened. With this idealized vision, Berenson established a link with the eponymous town of the Apulia, we are always in Apulia, and thus created the premises for a continuous contact with the Apulian territory that will go on until 1952. This Berenson link with Apulia started in the spring of 1897, during Berenson's first trip in this Italian region. In this occasion, he discovered the central panel of, I quote, a triptych for Giovinazzo by Lorenzo Lotto, a work received by him in such an orthographic quality as to be returned in a sketch reported in his notebooks kept in the Villa Tatti archive. It should also be noted that both the first and the second edition of his Lorenzo Lotto, an essay in constructive art criticism, dated 1895 and 91 respectively, were dedicated by Berenson to Edward Perry Warren. As I reported in the letters shown at the beginning of this report, Warren will also be in Puglia immediately after the first Berenson's trip in 1898, engaged in the negotiation of the Amenizes vase. In this affair was involved a leading figure of the cultural Apulian erudition, Antonio Jatta. Antonio Jatta was a member of the scientific board of Nazionale Museum Provinciale with uncommon skills in the archaeological and historical artistic fields, distinguished by the important gifts of coin, then for the central role he assumed in the delivery to the Museo Provinciale of several Venetian paintings held by the municipality of Andrea, in 1887. He was above all an intermediary for the purchase of vases and interlocutor of antiquarians specialized in numismatics like John Evans. With Evans we are in 1891. As such, it is not surprising that Jatta was also so close to Edward Perry Warren that he waited for him in his palace in Roma di Puglia on a May afternoon in 1898, a space that the Jatta Palace, in line with the interests of Warren and perhaps of Berenson, who from Ruvo will pass at least once in 1952. It is important to remember, first, the archaeological collection. Today, the Jatta Palace is the National Museum. Secondly, the library, equipped with iconic books for the transmission of classical ideals such as the one of the collections of antiquities of Lord Hamilton, and the last but not least, the collection of paintings set up from the ancestors of Antonio Jatta. I quote, amantissimi di pittura e di belle arti in generale, playing between the Neapolitan and Bari art market in the first 3 decades of the 19th century. We know from another Jatta Giovanni that inside the picture gallery there were, in particular, I quote, 2 importantissimi quadri, a pair of Lucrezie, one attributed to Artemisia Gentileschi and the other referred to the Neapolitan painter Gian de Rosa. Regarding the serpentine routes of the art market, both these paintings have recently been auctioned in Vienna. It is very probable that the 2 Lucrezie had witnessed the encounter between Jatta and Warren, and therefore of the sale of the, I quote, colossale vaso Italo-Greco, as it was later described by the first director of the Museo Provinciale of Bari, German Jew Maximilian Meyer. We recall that, in turn, Warren did not make but sold at good price, 4,000 lira, the artwork that is still preserved in the collection of the Museo Provinciale of Bari. The direct presence of Warren in Italy, and in Apulian in particular, should not be surprising. This can be read, in fact, as the continuation of the tradition of grand tourists that since the end of the 18th century had begun to extend their look behind the traditional destination Naples, Paestum, and Sicily. It should also not be forgotten that Warren, between 1999 and 1928, was the author of several literary works endowed with an idealized vision of homosexual relations, previously derived from the classical literary imaginary A Tale of Thousand Love, A Defense of Thousand Love, respectively 1999 and 1927. Imaginary that finds its reflection both in the relief of the famous Warren Cup, which he bought in Rome in 1911, now in the British Museum, as well as in the contemporary images of photographers such as Willem von Pluskov, Knot to give back figures of posing young people among the ruins of the same ancient world that had attracted Warren, but also Jatta. Perhaps thanks also to the historical tolerance that in southern Italy had matured for homosexuals during the Bourbon Kingdom in the absence of discriminatory law, Warren's presence in this area is linked to the intersection of demand and supply. It was an artistic market very interesting for another international collector such as Michael Tischewicz, called the Polish Count in the circle of Roman antiquarian. His collection, it seems interesting to note because of the coincidence were purchased right by Warren in Paris in June 1898. After having seen the Warren Jatta Berenson affair, I'm now told to Giuseppe Sandi will introduce us to other contemporary examples, always related to the Apulian art market between private and the public museum.
Thank you. It was Tischewicz who met in Rome Maximilian Meyer, the director of the Museo Provinciale of Bari. We are in 1896. From that to 12 months in Apulia would also arrive Berenson and then Warren. At that time, Meyer was in the new capital of Italy for the restoration of a large silver plate, the so-called Coppa Tarantina, one of, I quote the words of Meyer, Tribut producta Grec. Tischewicz defined the artist's object using words of great esteem to be purchased by Meyer on behalf of his museum. The importance of the object, discovered in Taranto in 1895, therefore appears twofold. On the one hand, it is evidence of the ability of a certain Bari culture to resist the temptation of an international market which at that time would have shown real attention to archaeological artifacts, especially silver. This is evidenced by the purchase of the Warren Cup in Rome in 1911, but probably came from Egypt. On the other hand, it is a paradigmatic piece to understand how sophisticated the evaluation process of similar objects was, even in apparently secondary contexts. This is demonstrated by what Mayer brought to the scientific board of the Museo Provinciale of Bari, which included, we recall, the Apulian friend of Edward Perry Warren, Antonio Jatta. As an expert in sale, Mayer wrote, I quote his words, mi permetto di rammentarvi che l'oggetto fu quasi regalato da me a questo paese, che nessuno seppe prima di me della scoperta fatta e che tenendo parecchie mila lire presso dal banchiere sarebbe stato facile acquistarlo per me, un'idea che non è mai venuta e che allora, rinunziando al mio posto, stessi per venderlo per lire 50.000, ciò che significa un 5 o 6% su vendita di circa lire 3.000. However, the art market of southern Italy between the 19th and 20th centuries was not only dominated by the interest in archaeology. From this point of view, Warren himself provided this by buying from his collection in England the, I quote, third best work in existence of Filippino Lippi, coming from the Sant'Angelo Neapolitan collection. It was the tomb with the Holy Family with St. John and St. Margaret, now at the Cleveland Museum of Art. The painting, purchased by Warren in the same year as the missing business from Bari, we are in 1898, was awarded to him by the inevitable Berenson, along with several others, an unspecified Tiziano, one deck of Virgil by Vincenzo Catena, and a portrait of a lady in brocades by Pusa Sorci. In this way, Berenson, already inside of Italy since 1897, responded to the request for collaboration that Warren later formalized at his address, as we saw at the beginning of this report with a letter of 1907. By doing so, Berenson also had the opportunity to perfect his famous lists, starting with those included in the third edition of the Venetian Painters of the Renaissance, also in 1997. Lippi's Tondo will not be the only case of a regional artistic heritage with a high risk of dispersion. This is also shown by another interesting polyptych from the Church of Santo Stefano in Monopoli, but in 1877 already privately owned. Through an agile booklet signed by the prefect of the archive of Monte Cassino, Andrea, we know that the polyptych was brought to Naples from Puglia at an institution of fine arts. There were two reasons for the transfer. The first one was a reproduction in the chromolithography table here proposed. In the book, studies on the monuments of southern Italy from the 3rd to the 13th century by Demetrio Salazzaro, painter and founder of the future National Museum of Magna Grecia in Reggio Calabria. The second reason was to present a polyptych in the Neapolitan Art Exhibition in 1977 in such a way that it occupied either one of the rooms of Pinacoteca of the National Museum, or that it was purchased by some private lover, like specified Caravita, his words were, sottraendolo al cordoglio di vederlo andar fuori come avvenne di tanti altri. Faded hopes. Remained in Naples, the Apulian polyptych was sold between 1892 and 1900 to the American Harvard couple from Boston, who then donated it to the Fine Arts Museum of their city. In a context such as the Southern and Apulian one in particular, the collection of paintings of the noble families on the way of dispersion before the unification of Italy turned out to be real supply basins. In this sense, a first example is given by the collection of the Acquaviva of Aragona in Conversano, we are in Bari, in Apulia, so described in 1877 by the architect Sante Simone to the Minister of Public Education Michele Coppino. The letter said: I vecchi del paese dicono che allorché i conti per i perduti privilegi si allontanarono dal loro castello, tutto fu manomesso e chi meglio poté, meglio fece, trafugando i migliori oggetti, specialmente preziose armature. I quadri scrivono per rilento, come se ne conoscevano i pregi, o con intesa della gente, o senza sua saputa. Think also of the collection of the Imperiale of Francavilla, that of the Mario of Acquavilla delle Fonti, still the collection of De Pau a Terlizzi, for which the sale was attempted at the Berber Museum between 1826-1827, and the collection painting of the Meoevoli at Monopoli, up to the collection of the Archbishop of Taranto, Giuseppe Capecelato, alienated in New York in 1835, and which, placed between his Neapolitan residence of Cappella Vecchia and the lost Villa Santa Lucia in Taranto, had many paintings attributed to Tiziano, Veronese, Sandi, Rubens, Murillo, Guido Reni, the inevitable Caravaggio, as well as two autographed self-portraits, as studied in the export authorization decree of Correggio and Giorgione. Just to stem this systematic dispersion in 1919, the Museo Provinciale was opening in Bari, which had begun to be talked about since 1875. Located in the Palazzo degli Studi and designed by Neapolitan Giovanni Castelli, the museum became a shelter from the artworks coming from the convents of Sopran orders, for the sculptural fragments of the rediscovered Middle Age, for the archaeological pieces discovered during the excavation at Canosa, Ruvo, Celli del Campo, and, not least, for the various paintings still in private hands. A significant element about the involvement of collectors like the aforementioned Antonio Jatta moved from the correspondence and documents preserved in the archive of the post-unification institution involved to the legal administrative competence of the museum. These institutions are Archivio Centrale dello Stato for the Direzione Generale Antichità e delle Arti, the Minister of Public Education, the Archive of State of Bari, and Archivio Storico della Provincia di Bari. On Jatta's report, for example, the painting The Mystical Marriage of Santa Catherine of Alexandria was purchased by an anonymous Professor Racchetti. At the time, the painting was attributed to Guercino by the director Mayer, thanks an inscription on the back of painting, then obliterated with the restoring of 1890. Later at work, the artwork were considered by Roberto Longhi to be a work of Genesis Group, perhaps of Fiasella. Again, in 1896, the Cavaliere Giustino Lamberti, an art market dealer and almost certainly a descendant of the two Lamberti brothers, Giovanni Antonio and Carlo Bari, active in the supply of works of art to the Real Museo Borbonico between 1826 and 1830, proposed the purchase of a presepe, this is the word of Lamberti, a presepe to be recognized in the Adoration of Shepherds by Andrea Celesti. Other paintings were the Baptism of Cristo by Paolo de Matteis, a Saint Jerome, and a Holy Family. All these to be joined to a timid and indistinctive crossroads of purchase negotiation which, as early as 1874, was getting from time to time around attribution from the clear improvement value, as in the case of an improbable wall gallery, picture gallery, comprising 4 works by Pietro Paolo Rubens, an autograph sketch of his Deposition of Cross, 12 paintings by Paolo de Matteis representing the St. Joseph histories, 12 artworks by Rembrandt, 4 Marines by Salvatore Rosa, and a sketch of Guido Reni. Finally, almost ironic is the case of Testa del Salvatore che porta la croce, parte del quadro detto Lo Stassimo di Sicilia, opera di Raffaello, offered to the museum in 1885. In this circumstance, presented here at the conclusion of this short excursus, the words of Giambattista Cavalcaselle were lapidary, as proof that the reception could almost always be the most truthful option. The words of Cavalcaselle were, Il quadro dello Spassimo di Sicilia, oggetto di questa istanza, trovasi nel Museo di Madrid, al qual dipinto non manca la testa del Salvatore. Quindi la testa del dipinto posseduta dal richiedente non è quella del quadro di Raffaello, Giovan Battista Cavalcaselle. Thank you for the attention.